For decades, we have romanticized storytelling as a product of pure, unguided inspiration. In reality, modern entertainment relies on a highly systematized manufacturing process. A brilliant story concept is incredibly fragile. Left to intuition alone, a complex narrative will inevitably collapse under its own weight during production. To prevent this, creators rely on narrative engineering. Narrative engineering is the discipline of mapping a story's pacing, emotional peaks, and character arcs using precise mathematical and structural models. By deconstructing the protocols professionals use, we can see exactly how these blueprints are built, whether for a 2-hour film or a heavily branching interactive video game. Structural rigor does not stifle creativity. It provides the necessary load-bearing walls that allow a creative vision to hold a mass audience's attention. The most widely applied temporal framework in commercial screenwriting is the 3-act structure. This diagram shows the standard 1:2:1 time ratio. Exactly 25% of the runtime is dedicated to the setup, 50% to confrontation and escalating obstacles, and the final 25% to the resolution. While the 3-act structure dictates external events, the hero's journey manages the protagonist's internal psychological progression. The hero's journey is a narrative template drawn from comparative mythology, outlining a character's path from innocence through a series of transformative trials. Identified by mythologist Joseph Campbell, this pattern tracks a fundamental psychological necessity. It rips a character from their ordinary world and forces them to adapt to an unfamiliar, hostile domain. Filmmakers like George Lucas deliberately adapted this mythological template to structure commercial cinema, mathematically ensuring a resonant psychological arc. To maintain viewer attention within this broad structure, modern screenwriters frequently employ Blake Snyder's 15-beat sheet. This timeline is divided into 15 strict intervals, dictating exactly where emotional stimuli must be injected to prevent fatigue. At the 50% mark, the midpoint node raises stakes. Later, the Dark Knight node forces utter despair before the climax. The pacing of an audience's emotional response is mapped and triggered by these precise structural milestones. Moving from the timeline to the actual script demands a shift to microscopic, localized assembly. A standard plot outlines the overarching narrative flow, but professionals refine this using Hakogaki, or box writing. Hakogaki breaks down a plot into individual scene units, outlining the characters, setting, and purpose of each moment before any dialogue is written. Treating every scene as an independent, modular data block allows the story to be rapidly detached, resequenced, and evaluated for logical flow. Professional writers allocate up to 2/3 of their production schedule to this block arranging phase, solidifying the foundation. Once a script is fully drafted with scene descriptions and dialogue, the format becomes rigid and difficult to restructure. The modular approach mitigates the risk of late-stage structural failure. Novelists face a similar data management problem, often solving it through the snowflake method. This initial step writes a single, compressed sentence defining the core conflict. That sentence undergoes rapid fractal expansion, splitting into a core paragraph, branching into character motivation sheets, and finally expanding into comprehensive, interconnected scene lists. This methodical expansion guarantees that the initial thematic logic remains intact, anchoring every localized detail across a massive final word count. Both modular block writing and fractal expansion function as strict quality assurance systems, identifying and debugging a story's logic long before the actual drafting begins. These linear models face a distinct problem in interactive media, where the audience is given direct control over the protagonist's actions. Video game scenarios, particularly role-playing games, abandon single-line narratives entirely in favor of system-dependent architectures. Traditional scene transitions are replaced by flag management, using conditional programming logic to track player choices and determine allowed narrative events. Through strict if-then mechanics, acquiring an item or speaking to a character permanently alters available story paths. A failure to perfectly map this conditional logic leads to fatal narrative collapse, resulting in story contradictions or game-breaking states halting player progression. Tabletop role-playing games introduce an even higher degree of structural disruption. Injecting mechanical randomness, such as dice rolls, removes the guarantee of a predetermined outcome. The storytelling shifts from a fixed script to emergent co-creation between the designer and the players. In interactive design, the objective is to engineer a robust, dynamic network capable of surviving the chaos of player agency. To bypass human cognitive limitations, modern creators actively inject external systems into their narrative frameworks. Major broadcast networks are increasingly scaling the writer's room model to handle massive television series. A writer's room is a collaborative environment where multiple specialized screenwriters work together to outline, draft, and refine a script under a single showrunner. Multiple authors act as parallel processors, instantly identifying plot holes and maintaining aesthetic consistency at a speed impossible for a single writer. This concept of systemic co-creation extends to technology, specifically the deployment of generative artificial intelligence. Professionals use prompt engineering to input strict narrative parameters. The AI computes structural scenario options, functioning as an extended analytical brain rather than a replacement for final prose. Conversely, some writers rely on the intentional entropy generated by analog randomizers, such as drawing tarot cards. Mapping narrative variables to randomized card pulls forces writers out of their default algorithmic logic, breaking entrenched tropes through deliberate chaos. Whether utilizing a room of writers, a language model, or a randomized deck, these external inputs eliminate the bottleneck of a single author's inspiration. Modern creation requires the injection of controlled entropy to discover novel solutions, while remaining strictly bound within a rigid structural framework. From a rigid screenplay timeline to a highly conditional, non-linear game network, these architectures share a distinct mechanical similarity. Successful production across all media relies on three absolute laws: thorough macroscopic structuring, early theme determination, and microscopic modular detailing. The core payload of a story, a protagonist overcoming escalating trials to achieve internal change, remains an ancient, unchanging human constant. Delivering this psychological payload to a modern, highly saturated audience requires rigorous, systemic execution. The modern storyteller is no longer an artist waiting for inspiration. They are a systems architect, manufacturing catharsis through precise data, logic, and structural engineering.